Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, our mission is a really rapid synthesis. We're looking at the absolute latest geopolitical developments,
Right.
and we're building it, interestingly, entirely around just one quite limited data point, a snapshot, really, from a live news feed focused on Europe. So this isn't about just reading facts off a page. It's more about digging into what the choice of words, the prioritization in that headline tells us.
That's exactly it. We are really zeroing in on material that points directly, it seems, to dynamic reporting from a very specific, very current date, October 15, 2025.
Okay.
And the source material is compelling, I think, because it forces us to look at the convergence of four critical themes. It locks them together right there in the spotlight of these Europe Live news updates: Russia, Ukraine, NATO, and France.
Right. Those four. And the value here for you listening is really getting a handle on the core strategic significance of seeing those four names together right now. You've got Russia's actions, Ukraine's, well, sheer necessity and resistance, NATO's framework, and then France's very specific role kind of embedded in that European update landscape.
Yes.
So our deep dive today focuses on analyzing what specific tension or maybe policy shift this particular quartet reveals. Let's unpack this framework.
Okay. So when we look at this grouping, Russia and Ukraine immediately jump out, right? They establish the necessary condition for anything being called live news in this context.
Sure. They're the core conflict.
They're the engine, really, of this persistent instability. By, late 2025, the narrative isn't just about the initial shock of invasion anymore. It's evolved
Into something else.
into a relentless, grinding conflict. Russia clearly remains the primary actor driving the military aggression, the diplomatic maneuvering, and, frankly, generating a massive resource strain across the entire continent.
And Ukraine, then, naturally, is that critical node of resistance. But it's also the focal point, the recipient of all that coordinated allied action. So if these updates are genuinely live, it implies the strategic situation, whether that's about urgent aid or maybe a counteroffensive success, or just keeping the lights on with infrastructure defense. It's demanding immediate, minute-by-minute attention.
Yes, constant updates needed.
They really are the center of gravity here, dictating the urgency, the behavior of the other two players mentioned, NATO and France.
And given that conflict dynamic, well, the inclusion of NATO is almost mandatory, isn't it?
You'd expect it.
The conflict fundamentally redefined the alliance. It shifted it, really, from just a defensive concept on paper to a very active coordination body.
Right.
So on October 15th, 2025, NATO isn't just an idea. It is the collective security guarantee in practice. It's the logistical hub, the primary mechanism for coordinating all that military and financial support needed just to keep Ukraine supplied and, crucially, keep the eastern flank secure.
Okay. That context makes NATO's role very clear. They're managing the huge logistics, the constant risk of escalation, integrating new members, perhaps. But let's zoom in, then, on the specific variable the sources highlighted alongside NATO. France. Why single out France? It feels, well, maybe a little counterintuitive.
How so?
Well, why highlight Paris over, say, Poland, who shares a direct border, or Germany, which provides, a huge chunk of the economic aid and is geographically maybe closer to the main logistical routes?
That's the exact question, isn't it? That's what separates just reading a news digest from doing a deeper analysis. The very fact that France is explicitly named there alongside NATO suggests the latest challenge, the reason it's live, isn't purely logistical or based just on geography.
Okay, so what then?
It feels like it's about Western strategic unity, or perhaps the tensions within it. France's inclusion almost acts as a kind of shorthand, shorthand for the tension between European self-reliance, which Paris strongly advocates for.
Right, that strategic autonomy idea.
Exactly that. Tension between that idea and the cohesion that's necessary under the, well, traditionally U.S.-led NATO structure.
So if we look at the source material that way, France's specific inclusion signals a moment of maybe strategic divergence, something that's happening right now and demanding immediate journalistic coverage.
Precisely. That feels right. France has historically always championed this strategic autonomy. It's that persistent effort to ensure Europe can stand on its own feet, militarily, diplomatically.
Rather than always relying on Washington's lead and, frankly, Washington's resources.
Yes. So when France becomes a key headline player in this context, it usually means Paris is forcing a strategic debate on this exact tension. They're pushing the boundaries, maybe, of the Western response.
Okay, but what practical form could that debate be taking right now, October October 15, 2025.
Yeah.
If we're talking live news updates, this has to be about imminent decisions, surely.
It must be.
Is France maybe advocating for a policy the rest of the alliance finds a bit too provocative? Something concerning, I don't know, delivery of long-range strike capabilities, maybe? Or specific rules of engagement?
It could be policy, yes, but it's probably also linked very strongly to industrial capacity.
Okay.
Remember, France is a nuclear power, and it's one of Europe's leading defense manufacturers. Their explicit mention here strongly suggests the core discussion might revolve around military-industrial output, supply chains.
Because the war in Ukraine is just burning through ammunition, through systems.
At a rate that, frankly, no Western power really anticipated.
Right. Okay, so let me see if I follow the logic here.
Right.
The speed of Russian aggression, that's the R. That dictates the material consumption rate over in Ukraine, the U.
Yes.
Which in turn exposes the supply weaknesses, the bottlenecks, within NATO, the N.
That's the chain.
And France, the F, gets highlighted because they are one of the few powers on the continent with both the, let's say, political will and the industrial base to actually try and solve that long-term supply weakness.
That's the functional connection, I believe, yes. France can offer an alternative, or at the very least, a powerful supplement to U.S. defense production. But, and this is key to do so, they might demand changes. Changes to NATO procurement rules, perhaps? Or push harder for European-only defense contracts?
In which inevitably creates friction within the alliance.
Exactly. And that friction is highly newsworthy. It merits a live update because it could shift things.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
The tension itself becomes the news story. The source isn't just saying, oh, France is helping. It's implying Paris is using this moment, leveraging its unique position, nuclear status, industrial capacity, to try and shift the whole strategic direction of the response. That feels like a huge risk, though, to the United Front. NATO is constantly trying to project.
It is a risk, and you can't separate the economic dimension here either. At French political leadership, they're facing their own internal pressures, high costs, inflation.
Sure, like everyone else.
And they're making choices regarding energy reliance, procurement speed, defense spending levels.
Yeah.
And these are direct ripple effects of the Russia-Ukraine war.
Right.
So if the live news is focusing on France, it probably means those domestic policy choices are having immediate external consequences, collective security implications for NATO's ability to sustain its support.
Let's maybe focus specifically on that difference, the contrast in the headline, NATO versus France.
Okay.
NATO, you could say, represent the consensus view, maybe sometimes the lowest common denominator required for action.
Yes, the collective agreement.
Whereas France, in this context, seems to represent something more unilateral, or at least decisive action aimed at asserting European leadership.
I think that's the critical distinction for you, the listener, to grasp. The source seems to be telling us that the story of Europe right now isn't just about what the collective is doing. It's also about how an individual heavyweight within that collective is attempting to define the parameters, the terms of that collective response.
So if France is pushing hard for greater Europeanization of defense,
Yes.
it could, paradoxically, be seen as undermining NATO unity in the short term, even if the intended long-term result is greater military capacity for Ukraine.
That's the tightrope they walk. And in a moment of live updates, the press is tracking exactly that. Does that French pressure create a damaging fracture, or does it actually catalyze a necessary collective response, maybe forcing others to step up?
Right. For example, if French policymakers suddenly, say, advocate for a new, really aggressive procurement timeline, something faster than the current NATO consensus allows, that would force every other member to immediately reconsider their own budgets, their own timelines. That's definitely headline material.
Absolutely. And think about the geopolitical impact. If France successfully influences NATO to adopt a more robust, maybe a more long-term European-led defense posture.
Like committing specific, large-scale, heavy equipment packages produced in Europe.
For instance, that changes the calculus. Not just for Ukraine's ability to resist, but also for Russia's own long-term military strategy.
How so?
Well, Russia then has to account for a potentially faster, more domestically produced European response capability, rather than banking solely on, say, the fluctuations of U.S. political will or transatlantic delivery times.
I see. So when a journalist bundles these four terms, Russia, Ukraine, NATO, France, they're essentially telling us, look, to understand the European geopolitical situation right now,
Yes.
you absolutely must grasp the relationship between the active conflict zone, that's Russia-Ukraine, and the evolving policy of the main security architecture, NATO.
Right.
Especially as that structure faces pressure for fundamental change from a key independent power broker within it. That's France. It's like a complete integrated system of conflict and response dynamics.
Exactly. It's an ecosystem. Moreover, by October 15, 2025, the very concept of live news strongly suggests that one of these four actors is making a decision, or perhaps taking an action, that is perceived as changing the strategic reality within hours, not days or weeks. And given the, relatively speaking, more static roles of the other three at this stage, Russia attacking, Ukraine defending, NATO coordinating, it seems highly probable that France is the dynamic variable here.
The one making the unexpected move.
The one making the move that requires immediate commentary and analysis. That's why they're explicitly named alongside the others.
That distinction, pinpointing France as the dynamic variable within the Western response architecture, that feels essential for understanding this specific snapshot in time.
I agree.
You aren't just reading about a general alliance meeting then. You're seeing a spotlight thrown onto a nation whose individual decision-making carries the weight, potentially, of shifting the entire NATO conversation, whether that's about engagement levels, negotiation postures, or long-term territorial security guarantees.
So let's try to synthesize the core analysis here. You have Russia's military aggression driving the urgent demand for material in Ukraine.
Okay. Cause and effect.
NATO serves as the primary framework for coordinating the supply and the collective defense posture.
The structure.
And France acts as that singular, powerful voice, attempting to fundamentally shape the direction and maybe even the speed of that framework's response. Often by leveraging its unique strategic assets, nuclear status, defense industry, and by consistently advocating for greater European autonomy. These four names are dynamically linked: cause, consequence, framework, and
Catalyst.
That's a good word for it here. Which brings us back to the synthesis, wrapping this up. We've been tracking these four entities: Russia, Ukraine, NATO, France, kind of locked in this intense geopolitical embrace. With France playing this complex role, maybe the alliance's conscience, pushing for capability, or perhaps its disruptor, challenging unity. It depends on your perspective, I suppose.
And the key takeaway for you, the listener, is pretty clear. Global narratives, especially complex ones like this, rarely hinge on simple binaries. It's not just A versus B.
They hinge on the complex interplay between massive military alliances, like NATO, and the decisive actions or potential actions of individual member states, especially powerful ones like France, particularly when they're responding to active, sustained conflicts like the one between Russia and Ukraine.
And the news is live, because the decisions being made or debated by these specific players, they are changing the chessboard in real time.
Precisely.
And that dynamic nature, of course, means the information is constantly shifting. Which leads to a final thought, something for you to consider moving forward.
Okay.
Given that France is specifically called out here, alongside NATO signaling both the collective and a distinct individual power in action, it really raises an important question, doesn't it?
Which is?
Is this moment, October 15, 2025, based on this source, is this maybe the point where key Western European powers, perhaps led by France, finally start to seize more of the strategic and diplomatic initiative, moving the alliance towards a truly distinct, maybe more European-centric defense policy?
That's the big question hanging in the air.
Definitely something to keep an eye on. How does that specific France-NATO relationship evolve next? That seems critical.